In Star Trek, there is a ruthless and villainous race of cybernetically enhanced humanoids called the Borg. They are a race with no individuality. All of their minds are joined into a single collective whose will cannot be questioned or influenced by any individual Borg drone. Their modus operandi is to constantly and forcefully assimilate new species and new technologies into their collective, always telling their unwilling conquest that resistance is futile, and that they should accept assimilation without a struggle. Sometimes I think maybe the Borg have a point. Many people, perhaps most people, blame our politicians for the woeful state of America and the world in 2011. Most Americans feel that they're not being properly represented in Congress, and most Americans are right. Astrophysicist and public intellectual Neil deGrasse Tyson was recently asked by the New York Times what he would do if he were president. He rejected the notion of becoming president, even on a hypothetical level, and said, "One objective reality is that our government doesn't work, not because we have dysfunctional politicians, but because we have dysfunctional voters. As a scientist and educator, my goal then is not to become president and lead a dysfunctional electorate, but to enlighten the electorate so they might choose the right leaders in the first place." I've heard similar sentiments from my YouTube friend and ally Paul's Ego, who goes further than Neil by not only insisting that the electorate is dysfunctional, but has also said that the will of the voting public has been completely subverted. And I find the position of both Paul and Neil to be more intelligent than the average person blaming the GOP or Obama exclusively for the ills of America. But I don't agree with either of them. I don't agree with Neil that if we simply educate the populace, they will coalesce into a unified people under the banner of reason and logic. And I don't agree with Paul that the main threat to democracy is subversion by corporate behemoths who reign over our elected leaders, barking stentorian directives at them and considering the American people last, if at all. The real problem, in my opinion, is that the American people are not united in their vision of America. I'm sure similar problems currently afflict most countries. Now, America has always had ideological diversity. We had a bloody civil war here over our inability to agree on the future direction of our country. And yet, despite our ideological differences, we've always kept this country moving forward. But if you think about it, for most of our history, we've had diversity filters that kept too many ideas from flourishing simultaneously. Remember, when we first initiated this democratic process, we only allowed those who were white, male, and rich enough to own land to vote. It wasn't until 1870 that black men could vote. It wasn't until 1920 that women could vote. And even then, there were mechanisms of suppression. We had to go through a civil rights movement to give any real power to women and blacks. Then we had to go through a gay rights movement in the 80s and 90s to empower the gays. But there were still many oppressed groups on the fringes yearning for a national stage. Then came the internet. Now we live in a country where people of all cultural backgrounds, all sexual orientations, all racial groups, all income levels, all sections of the educational strata, both genders, they all have a voice and a vote. And this is a good thing. But it's also the source of a major problem. How can a rich man be expected to understand the plight of a poor man? How can a poor man care about the interests of a rich one? How can a black man from the ghetto relate to the vision of America held by a white woman from the suburbs? The Tea Party movement essentially exists as a referendum against the empowerment of non-heterosexuals and non-whites. They're the backlash against the engine of social change that diluted their stranglehold on popular opinion and electoral power. I've heard many of them lament that if not for minority voters, blacks and Hispanics, Obama would not have won. Which is true, but why is it lamentable? They say this as if Obama is not legitimately their president because he didn't have the majority support of their in-group. They still feel as if they're the only populace that should matter. It's so bad that Ann Coulter once declared that giving women the right to vote was a mistake, because they often vote for candidates that don't further the conservative agenda. If not for women voters, Republicans would have won every single election of the 20th century except for Goldwater versus Johnson. Normally, the proper course of action when dealing with some opposing force is to come to a compromise, to give them a little of what they want, to get a little of what you want. But that's not palatable here. Antagonism towards the left is no longer incidental in the right wing, it's the defining characteristic. They no longer stand for anything so much as they stand against something. And that something that they stand against is giving a fair share of power to every other social group. Do low-income whites vote Republican because they're tired of their tax dollars paying for welfare? No, because if they're part of the bottom 50%, they're not paying anything in income taxes in the first place. They vote Republican because they're told that it will end social safety nets for leeches who live off of government money. They ignore that many of them are on welfare, Medicaid, Medicare, Social Security, and unemployment. That's far too inconvenient of a reality for them to heed or factor into their decision-making process. They want to deport the Hispanics, disempower the blacks, revoke the hard-won rights of the gays, and retake America for the white and the wealthy. Never mind that most of them aren't wealthy. They're willing to make a pact with those who are if it means rolling back social progress to a time when they called all the shots. We are in a culture war, and those on the left are losing because we're on the side that fails to acknowledge it. While the Republican electorate, not the politicians, mind you, but the electorate, use the Tea Party to radicalize their base and oust their moderates, while they take the offensive and seek to ban gay marriage, gut social safety nets, lower taxes to unsustainably low levels, we play defense, using all our efforts to merely stave them off. Every compromise our elected leaders have made with these people has advanced their agenda and set ours back. They attack, we defend, and we keep losing terrain. I see only two solutions. One, we become the Borg. We unite under a single consciousness and surrender our individuality. Two, we recognize that we're in a culture war and stop playing defense. It's time to stop merely trying to stop these people and to start advancing our own agenda against them. The first thing we have to do is start a liberal and moderate coalition to respond to the far right-wing forces that have conquered the Republican Party. We have to oust the compromisers in the Democratic Party and find politicians that are not necessarily radical leftists, but left-leaning and actually principled. We have to bring our ideologies together. We need to get the black and Hispanic Democrats behind gay rights in a way that they're not right now. We have to reaffirm the core of our agenda and advance it from there. What do we want? We want a stronger social safety net, including universal health care. We want the rich to pay more taxes. We don't want to bleed them dry. But asking people with $10 million to pay a higher percentage than a family of 5 making $54,000 a year is not unreasonable. Even those who run small to mid-sized businesses are being fucked by a government that bleeds them dry while giving the largest corporations on earth a free pass to basically ignore their tax obligations. We want an end to the wars in the Middle East. We want federally recognized gay marriage nationwide, regardless of what individual states attempt to mandate or preclude. We want the federal government to legalize and tax recreational drug use. We want to restore secularism in America, get God off our money, and tax the churches, a measure which even religious people should support. Do Southern Baptists want Quaker doctrine entered into law? Christianity is not unified, and no one wants the religious beliefs of another to become the laws of the land. We want the history curriculum in schools to focus on real history, not whitewashed versions of it that portray one ideology as right or wrong. Just the facts. People should not be afraid of the truth. Only liars fear the truth. We want a police force that is actually trained to help citizens instead of brutalizing them with impunity. We want America to lead the world in science and space exploration, not lead the world in creationists, prison population, and defense spending. That is our agenda, and right now, we shrink from it. We act as if a left-wing agenda is something we should disavow. Of course we don't have an agenda. Only the bad guys have an agenda. Yes, you're right. Right now, only the bad guys have an agenda. That's why they're winning.